Hi Pramod, how wonderful to speak to you here again. Thank you so much for taking the time out to answer a few basic questions for countries who are looking to explore building population scale solutions through the digital public infrastructure approach in their own countries. Starting of course once again with India's digital identity program. How did the concept of Aadhaar come about? How was it built, and where were you at that time when you got pulled into this project?
Where was I? I was at home. I was in Bangalore by then. By the way, I had moved back from the US early 2000. So one of those good days, I opened newspaper, Deccan Herald, and the big news. It's a Bangalore newspaper, so obviously it's a big news that Dr. Manmohan Singh has invited Nandan Nilekani to take over, run the Aadhaar project, and that morning changed everything, and that was amazing because funny thing is my two biggest life changing decision came out of newspaper reading in the morning. One, shifting out of my town, going out of my town for my masters, was one of those newspaper serendipity reading, applying randomly, and then completely changing the course of my academics, and then later my work through this. But I had read the Imagining India book, Nandan's earlier first book, where he did talk about the power of identity and why is it critical for social inclusion. So it just made total sense.
How well defined was this DPI approach right at the start? Because now it's well documented and it's well researched and there's so many examples of proof of success, right? But right at the beginning, when you were just starting out, when probably even the word digital public infrastructure was not coined, how well defined was it and what did it take to make it more structured?
No, architecture principles were very much. I've been practicing this quite a lot. Um, we built extremely large commercial, my commercial life, built platforms. We were building APIs in 99, completely at that time XML based. JSON had not come. So it was, I had my patterns quite clear in my head. Even if it was not that minimal, I would have still created layers to abstract it out well. Technical patterns were very clear, but the rule making, the project, the coherent way of running a project, all that thing was not obvious at all. Even Delhi, they didn't even have an office. They just gave one small room, and end of that corner, in original planning commission office. In Bangalore, we didn't have an office. We used to pile onto one of our, then Srikant's house. Then later we took an apartment, apartment, and we were a couple of people lived there, and then we used to use dining room as the thing. So it was like a startup, and we had to figure a lot of things out before a full project approval, office all came. It nearly took, I would think 8 to 9 months before started falling in place.
So building population scale infrastructure is definitely not easy. Were there some moments of like self-doubt or insecurity or some challenges that crept in along the way, and how did that make you feel and how exactly were you able to overcome it?
No project of this scale is ever smooth sailing. And if somebody tells you that, it's just wrong. I'm pretty sure it never happens. And especially this kind of scale and diversity and the complexity of India. But question about did I believe it was a mistake? Never. Not even once. Did I believe this team won't pull off? No. I'm a crazy optimist. So, I never had any pessimistic or negative thoughts around it at all. I never have it, even otherwise. I find my ways to navigate the life. But but there were situations where we were looking at quite difficult, both technology battle, in the sense as a scale. The scale was enormous and never been done before. So, it was very clearly told to us that you will need a football field full of soccer field full of $1 million computers to pull off this deduplication. And so it is theoretically possible, but not economically viable as practical. And those situations we had, what do we do? Kind of criteria. And then we had to we had to really use computing techniques, understanding the trends, and to say Moore's law, can we play this game well? And then we eventually completely built using commodity computing, everything, right? I mean, it was very cheap in one sense we pulled off. There were also political battles, very well known, the Home Ministry versus UIDAI, the NPR project versus Aadhaar, where situations we were not sure. 2014, when new Prime Minister Modi came, there was a political complete shift, and we were not sure at any point in time whether there could be a risk to the project. And Supreme Court case in Aadhaar was deep and sometimes saddening to see wrong stories being sold in the court and confuse the judges and so on. But we were very confident that our design principles were extremely privacy friendly, and designs were very, very secure, extreme minimalism in the system, and truly generating value, unlocking value for the Aadhaar holders. So I think we were sure we'll come through well, but many situations, even in UPI, UPI we have faced at least twice that we could have had, near death experience. But NPCI's leadership, RBI's leadership, serendipity, right time, right place, many things, I think it just works through. If you have the right intent, I think sometimes you have the right team, I think everything falls through most of the time.
How did the design principles of this project evolve over time? What are some of the assumptions you started out with, and what did it finally grow into becoming?
Very good question. Design principles reasonably stayed, almost all design principles reasonably stayed constant, except federal or decentralized design. Aadhaar was a very sovereign identity issuance problem, so it was a government ID project, and hence most of a platform thinking. By the time we came e-sign was merely a spec. It was no software involved. It was an open spec where the market could build e-sign providers, as we call. They could be licensed to provide based on the spec. So interoperability was even more reinforced at that time. DigiLocker was about a platform but facilitating a lot more decentralized issuance and decentralized acceptance of verifiable credentials. And then we did DPI, which is UPI, of course, which is an open network for payment, 350 banks, hundreds of apps, billions of merchants and so on, right? So many nodes connecting into a network. So the network architecture started emerging much more. Although I did network architecture with DigiLocker in my original writing, it didn't become a full network. It is still a little bit of a platform play. Right, wrong, at that time it was okay, I think it was to do that. But by the time UPI came, we were very clear we were starting to move towards a network model and not a platform centric. So minimalism stayed well, privacy and security by design stayed well, interoperability stayed extremely well, market innovation stayed always, because without innovators using DPI elements or the ingredients, DPIs are just ingredients, somebody has to combine that to serve value, to create solutions on top of it. That remained same, but the network architecture and a lot more decentralized architecture was an effect of, I would say, UPI onwards. DPA, the account aggregator, the open finance and open data architecture we did, personal data, consented data sharing architecture, is very, very unusually and hence a little bit complex, frankly, but unusually decentralized. Very, very good in the long run for privacy and security, but initial implementation may be a little bit hard, so. And then we did ONDC and Beacon and all completely decentralized peer-to-peer commerce, peer-to-peer mobility and so on, right? So that is only one, I would say, that's only principle, I would say, that expanded like internet, lot more architecture like internet. Very, very interestingly, the two things that we always speak about is GPS and internet, right? We always talk about these two. GPS is somewhat like a platform play, and but except that it has extreme minimalism built in, just tells you where you are, no other connotation, whether you are booking, riding, moving, walking around in a park. I mean, it has no understanding. The GPS itself has no such understanding. But internet was very different from GPS in that sense that it was completely an open protocol driven, an open standards driven, but a network topology, as we call. It's not. It's a topology of many nodes coming together. The more nodes you add to the internet, the more valuable it becomes, right? So that's why the network effect becomes that way. Whereas GPS was doing one thing very well. So Aadhaar is like GPS. GPS tells you where you are, and sort of Aadhaar tells you who you are, not philosophically, but from a system perspective. Whereas UPI and ONDC and account aggregator, if you look at it, they are like internet. There's no software per se, right? It's completely driven out of open protocols, open standards, but many nodes join in, and the more nodes join in, more value it unlocks in the society.
So there are a lot of emerging technologies that we keep hearing about. How exactly does DPI compare to all of them, right? What's the difference between DPI and deep tech?
It's not DPI versus deep tech. It's a very interesting thing. DPI, when we work in creating the DPIs, a lot of us are creating, helping build these DPIs, whether it's in India or outside the country. We are wearing more of a social or societal entrepreneur hat, not a traditional entrepreneur hat. That takes a little bit of that you need to have a little bit of freedom to do that, to be able to give up your money aspirations or such large scale $1 billion company kind of aspirations. There's not much money at all, but the satisfaction, potentially impact you can create is very large. So if it's not DPI versus deep tech. It's a DPI whether you are working for creating societal impactful project or whether you are doing in the commercial, nothing wrong either way. I would encourage everyone to participate. Even if you're an entrepreneur, come back and spend a year or two building for society, then go back as an entrepreneur. Nothing wrong. And you get to see both sides of the world very well. But to answer the other part of the question, DPI can be applied to democratize AI. So when we do Bhashini, the Indic language project, because we believe that 100 million people English speaking, another 100 million at best you can push, they can detect words. So if you say start, go, they can detect that, they can figure out. They can't construct sentences and paragraph, but they can navigate an app. Beyond that, it gets very hard. Then after that, it's all emojis and, symbols and all that thing, because you have not given them a choice. And so I think we believe in India, the next biggest human-computer interaction would come through voice and native human language. Now with LLMs, language technologies, they're all coming together thick and fast. So if you can leverage that to create human-computer interaction, ease of transaction, ease of access to knowledge, ease of access to financial transactions and so on, in native human form, then it's extremely powerful. It just gets 9 billion people to be able to actually do, right? That's a very powerful imagination. And AI, so it's not AI versus DPI. We applied DPI thinking to AI to create democratized Indic language models and data sets, encouraging now the market innovators to say, it's time you create voice-enabled interactions and interfaces for the next 500, 600 million people, 800 million people in India, and maybe around the world as well, beyond.
So whenever people hear the word digital public infrastructure, their first question might be, what about people who don't have access to the digital world, who don't have internet connectivity, who might not have devices? So does DPI actually deepen the digital divide in countries?
Brilliant question. Actually, this is one of the most common questions gets asked. Through DPI, do you create a greater digital divide? And then people who have the services and capability and capacity tend to do even more and they go ahead of the curve, right? Our answer has been, at least our experience, India has been, it's not the case at all, provided the architecture and design of the DPI, you get it right. That means you can, and I can absolutely say this, you can, through Aadhaar, DigiLocker and UPI, we have truly demonstrated that we can create a common rail, the DPI, that caters to people with smartphone, people with feature phone and people with no phone. Today in India, UPI, same UPI, is used by 495 million transactions last month by people who have no phones. So it is absolutely possible, or digital verifiable credential. You know, when our vaccination certificate was issued as verifiable credential, people who had smartphone could carry the credential in their wallet, you know, whether you're iPhone, Android, whatever, some sort of wallet. And people who had feature phone could say, okay, now I don't have any capability there, so I would probably print it out, like almost no phone. So credentials can go paper or digital, smartphone or a kiosk, assisted services. I can go online and offline. By the way, credentials can be verified completely offline with no connectivity whatsoever. That means an identity authentication and credential verification. Credential means academic credential, your certificates, marriage certificate and so on can be verified with no connectivity whatsoever. So it is possible to design, if you design well. So at the Center for DPI, as you know, we work through, one of the reasons why we even exist as Center for DPI is to actually get this essence into the design so that they don't make the mistake of let's create a smartphone app for payment and they completely miss this point, right? Saying that you're going to create more divide by doing that.
What was the idea behind India's Interoperable Payments Network, the UPI system, and how exactly was it built?
So, very interesting story. So, Dilip Asbe, who is the CEO of NPCI, Nandan Nilekani and I, literally the first conversation on UPI, or the idea, there was no name called UPI, but we were brainstorming in 2013. 2013 brainstorming brought out the need for us to leverage the trend. What was 2003? 3G was coming thick and fast. Android phones were everywhere. IMPS was quite successful in India. That is, push payment was quite successful in India. Connectivity is starting to come in. Paytm, companies like Paytm have started to make some good, interesting, which is great innovations, right? China was pushing forward for a QR code payment, but to, you know, sort of non-interoperable way, you know, Alipay and WeChat. So we were starting to think, if we were to do a next generation payment that is P2P, peer-to-peer, P2M merchants, you know, any to any, and truly create an Aadhaar effect. By then it was 2013, right? So if you could create an Aadhaar-like approach, we didn't call it DPI, we call it, how would we create this network, payment network, next generation payment network? Then we left there, okay? We sort of, it was one of those. But the itch continued for a year, 1 year. We were all, I think 3 of us were literally thinking. Nothing was written. And then I created the first presentation on UPI. And then I titled UPI because I thought some brand guy will rename it. And nobody renamed it. And it stayed UPI because it was truly my thinking. It's not a brand name. Unified was the key for me. Interface meant protocol, not code. Just how would these companies, how would a merchant, how would a bank plug it in into this interface, standard interface? So payment, of course, payment. So UPI was my acronym to bring out the two absolute core of why did we do UPI? You and I, okay, protocol and unified. Unified via protocol. Somehow we got it, right. But as a computer scientist, I think from first principles. I didn't need to know how payments worked, but I had to ask, I had to learn. But NPCI, Dilip was there. Satish was there. Brilliant guy. He's still there in NPCI, leads at tech, UPI tech. We just huddled. At that time, Sanjay joined as well. So we just huddled ourselves in the second year as we started writing the protocol. And they would explain, NPCI team would explain how does settlement, what is RBI ledger, central bank ledger, this ledger, and we'll say, all right, this is how stuff works. But the good thing is that knowledge is curse sometimes. I mean, that's one thing. That's why sometimes you say youngsters have no barrier of imagination, right? Older people like us tend to be, because we already done so many times, we tend to do the same thing again and again. So we were new. I was very, very new to this payment. That allowed me to rethink. And my first sentence was that if SMTP can send email between two parties and HTTP can transfer content between two browser and a website so seamlessly, why can't we move money? Money should be moved as easy between the two parties as email or instant message. So some of that allowed us to think from first principles. And then 2014 to 2015 early, we were completing the protocol and bringing out the early pilot announcement. And then we announced a pilot. 2015 to 16 was all about early experiment. 2016 we launched.
How is UPI different from other financial systems around the world? A lot of countries look towards making their own payment networks. How is UPI different from them?
When you think back, I'm not sure what's special, but the special, really what's special is that 10.5 billion transactions and, between AEPS and UPI, 500 million people doing digital payment. It is special for India. So the impact is very special for us. Impact in SME, India, people have come and seen the roadside. China was very peculiar. It was a closed loop. Think of this like two different companies creating a closed loop wallet system with brilliant innovation, QR code and everything, but I cannot transfer money from one to other until the government finally mandated and took over, over there. Traditionally they didn't. It was just a private play. Or a mobile money operator in Africa, well known, would do the same thing. If I were running a private company, I would create a moat as well, in terms of creating a locked, closed loop. So think of China's early experiment is like WhatsApp. You can send message from WhatsApp to WhatsApp, but you can't send message from WhatsApp to Signal or Telegram, right? So India, we wanted an open loop payment. So that is very, very important. And PIX is somewhat, similar. PIX was much later, couple of years later than UPI. So you have advantage of learning from each other, which is brilliant. So create open loop was very key. But I think UPI, now people might think we are a little bit boasting about UPI, but UPI design was very, very interesting. The protocol design, it was not just the idea of protocol. It is the idea of abstraction. What does it mean? We abstracted in UPI. We did not assume a UPI needs smartphone. We did not assume UPI will move rupee, currency agnostic, device agnostic. We did not assume it will be PIN-based authentication. That means authentication factor agnostic. We did not assume, the context of payment. That means P2P, P2M, G2P, NT to B2B. We didn't really care. So we did not create separate rails. So a lot of countries tend to do it. I have a P2P network, then I have a ATM network. We did not, by the way, UPI did not even assume it was a bank account. The store of value was not assumed, which is why we launched credit on UPI. We can launch all kinds of products on UPI without changing the protocol. Protocol was abstracted. That abstraction I have not seen very well. Frankly, I would challenge, I think even Pix may not have reached it fully there. They will reach it. They can reach very easily. Brilliant innovation there. But I don't think they have designed upfront recurring payments, for example, in UPI. All these were designed in 2014 and 15 in the protocol, in the design. Although we did not write, because that is where our plus one thinking comes into play. We have to really assume where the regulator is and where the banks are and who the initial participants are. And when you create a protocol driven network, you want people to accept it. If you create a lot of capabilities, then you instill fear. So one of the things we did, we underplayed much of UPI's capability. Even now, I don't think people fully have understood what all we can do in UPI in future, which is okay, which is right thing to do. Why, let there be right time for everything. So we launched P2P with a 5,000 rupee limit initially. As architect, I was disappointed. I said, really, we could have done much more, right? But subsequently, and rightly so, we have to create customer support, trust in the system, scale has to be tested, failure scenarios have to be tested. It's about money of people. So regulator was, and NPCI, Dilip was smart enough to make sure that we don't run ahead of us to carefully roll it out. So whether it took 6 years, I think it is right thing to do. But now we have credit on UPI, we have cards on UPI, and we have now current account on UPI, and we have many. And Singapore, India was a very interesting where a currency agnostic was proven. And we can move from one currency to other. For example, from a CBDC to a regular currency, commercial money, we can actually on UPI. So UPI is just a rail, just a protocol that moves any any currency equivalent value from one node to other node instantly in a guaranteed fashion. That's it. So it was abstracted very, very well, which allowed us to do a lot of innovation on top.
Whenever we talk about the digital public infrastructure approach, a lot of countries look at India's success story, what we call the India stack. So how exactly did India become such a success story for DPI?
Yeah, sometimes I also wonder why, frankly, people overestimate India's capacity and capability, okay, sometimes. Although we do have, definitely we have the largest number of engineers and so on. Doesn't mean that many engineers were participating in building this. Think about it. It was Aadhaar was 5 people design team, technology design team, 150 people in the whole organization, and about 40 people in the tech vendor. First 2 years we had 42, at best we went up to 60 or 70 people. So it was a very small team. You don't need that at that scale, and we were doing 1.5 million enrollments every day. So think about, we managed quite well if you design leveraging the ecosystem, simple design and small crack team. But I think, and even GST, we had a very, very small team. Initially, CDPI, Vijay, for example, was part of that design. So we were small team there. Fast Tag literally was NPCI again led. A couple of us literally designed the core of how the tag security as well as the API for it. Application programming interface between the car as it passes through and the backend. These are actually simple. According to me, it's quite simple and straightforward to do because there is clear, well understood design patterns now with, well documented by CDPI team to be able to apply. Small team. But I would always urge, I think our real success was the first success. Success breeds success. I think when Aadhaar was successful, it was much easier for us to say, we'll do e-sign and DigiLocker under Digital India initiative. By then, the same CEO, literally Aadhaar CEO had gone as IT secretary. So we only need 1 or 2 good bureaucrats, a small team to actually reimagine the possibilities. And the moment DigiLocker e-sign and then UPI was launched, now it's so easy in India to say, let's build a UPI for e-commerce. And then everybody says, of course, let's do it, right? Because nobody is even blinking, saying, what are you saying, right? So I think countries must look for early success not from a system perspective, success from ground level, at scale, value unlocking for citizen. One thing, please do one thing well, and doesn't need complex team, complex software, or complex anything at all. 5 people can actually do a DigiLocker like environment for other country. That's all it takes. It's a very, very simple software. It's an open specification based system, very interoperable. But when you bring success, the entire leadership in the country tend to believe. I think the best thing India pulled off is that a belief that we can actually do.
Okay, so a personal question, and it might be difficult for you to choose between all your children initiatives, but what is your favorite DPI initiative?
As a parent, I can tell you, all children are always a favorite. Okay, there's no way a parent will never differentiate, because each of them has unlocked one specific value at scale. Each of them have their own reason for existence, why they exist, and what they do really well. That minimalism and a building block approach we did allows, it's not one monolithic system in India. Each child, in that sense, does one thing really, really well for the country, and it's brilliant. Love to see it. It's always wonderful to see each child in that sense growing up to massive scale, continue to grow, continue to impact lives at scale.
So you skipped that last question, but we're going to let it pass. How do other countries actually adopt the DPI approach? If they're interested in building their own DPI stacks, where should they start and how should they go about it?
So I think there's a lot of confusion typically that India built everything based on Aadhaar. And even after 10 years, we have had really important thought leaders around the world thinking UPI runs on Aadhaar. Is it? No, they had nothing to do with each other. I mean, they amplified each other, definitely. Aadhaar allowed bank account opening to happen. If you don't have a smartphone, you can do Aadhaar-based payment, which is using the same UPI protocol. So very interestingly, it amplifies each other. But other than that, it was not that interdependent. So I would think countries should think from their most impactful, most value unlocking DPI first. For example, one country might say, we are very, very an agrarian, and agriculture is the most compelling use case that we want to go. Even there, you can say, agriculture doesn't mean you can't do DPI. DPI is a way of thinking. So you can create very, very powerful, and you can use that as the lever, agriculture as the domain lever. For us, financial inclusion was a lever for Aadhaar. But it could be agriculture for Aadhaar also. No? So you can bring out some of these projects out as a derivative of a larger transformation that you are seeking. But order doesn't matter. I think there are some things that are low-hanging fruit. So I would really urge people to say, if you really don't know, if you have not made up your mind, do credentialing first. I would actually say it's the lowest hanging, easiest, and most touching every citizen. It will touch. There's no country in the world that doesn't issue certificates of some kind. Birth certificate, marriage certificate, academic certificate, college certificate, income certificate. We issue everything like a certificate. So just credentializing is probably the easiest thing to do. E-sign is quite easy to pull it off. ID, it is slightly harder because it has a lot more sensitive discussions that ought to happen. Payment shouldn't be hard. I don't know why payment is hard. I think maybe the incumbents make it harder than necessary. So sometimes you have to create challengers and new induce. Maybe regulators ought to look at inducing new challengers to change the game. But it shouldn't be hard. So there's no order. Start now. Start today. Yeah.
There are so many emerging problems and problems that have been around in the world for generations, right? And obviously when we look towards the future, we can see that some problems are going to enhance themselves in strength, some of them are going to become weaker, but how exactly can DPI help us tackle these rising challenges? How can it equip us to face the future better?
DPI is a way of thinking. DPI is not a specific technology, and right now we are in the thick, in global north, in Europe, and soon in America, and in northern hemisphere, much of the developed nations. We are starting to do sustainability efforts, sustainable urban mobility, sustainable circular economy. Um, we are looking at reskilling during the EV transition, especially after market in the mobility and automobile sector, where very rapid EV transition is going on. Agriculture, recycle economy, there was a very, very huge, and Delhi battles with, because of lack of that viable economy supply chain there, right? So we are looking at 5 or 6 areas in the sustainability and climate action where DPI can absolutely be applied, being applied, and there are pilots that are kicking in right now. So no question about it, whether DPI can be applied for sustainability and climate action. Absolutely yes. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking to bring technology layers to connect, unify, regulations and policy to create some sort of safeguards, and allowing the innovator, whether it's market innovators or NGOs or social entrepreneurs or even the government, to innovate on top of it. Why would that architecture not be applicable to anything that is coming our way? In fact, I would end with this. I would say this: DPI does not solve. Don't think DPI is going to solve world's biggest problems. I think humans will create problems for ourselves, enough of it, okay? But DPI gives an ability and options for creating solutions to an unknown future. So when the future is unknown, how do you know what solution is going to work? So you are actually creating options for the future. As Nandan called it, optionality as a strategy. DPI is a strategies to create options to the future, so that you can assemble, using these building blocks, rapidly diverse applications, combine the entire ecosystem, unify them on a protocol, governance and policies, and innovations on top of it. I think this is the only way, I would argue, that we can navigate to an unknown future.